So I want to be rather brief today, but there was some very exciting news that came out at the end of March about the results of a new clinical trial that's really the type of information we've been waiting for. The speaker after me, our guest speaker, Dr. Bell, is going to spend a lot of time talking about how all this developed, but I just wanted to share with you some of this information. So it begins back about 5.5 years ago when we had this very exciting news that a new drug was now that had been discovered and supported by the foundation that showed substantial improvement in patients with cystic fibrosis. In fact, it made the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the most prestigious journal that's there. And this is the article that reported that this medication, which when taken by someone with CF who had a specific mutation, that it would help correct the abnormalities that that mutation was causing and help the patient clinically. That drug, as you all know, is ivacaftor. It's one blue pill a day. And this is someone that you maybe have heard talk here before. This is Emily Schaller. She's a great spokesperson for us. And she was one of the people who volunteered for this clinical trial. And within 2 days of her starting the medication as part of the trial, she knew that her life had changed for the better. So this was ivacaftor, and we were all very excited about it, but there's a catch. And the catch was you had to have a certain type of mutation in order to benefit from it. And now we know there's about 8% of the people in this country with cystic fibrosis. They have one of those mutations, and they've benefited from it a lot over the years that it's been available. But we really need to have something that's for all patients with cystic fibrosis. And one of the main goals has been to try to target the most common mutation. That's delta F508. And because 40% or 46% will have 2 copies of it, and another 40% will have 1 copy of it. So we all were very excited back in July of 2015 when a new treatment was developed for people with these mutations. And in fact, it's for people who had both of their mutations were the delta F508. And it was a combination medication, lumacaftor and ivacaftor, and that too showed improvement, and it led the Food and Drug Administration to approve it. In this Orkambi, it's 2 pills twice a day for an adult with it, and it's been available now for several years. As I mentioned, 46% of the patients with cystic fibrosis have the right set of mutations, that is 2 copies of this delta F508, to make them in a position to be able to benefit from it. But the problem is that some people have side effects from this medication and can't continue to take it. And also there's a problem with part of the medication that would interact poorly with other medications that we frequently prescribe for CF patients. So although this was a giant step forward, we still had a ways to go. So what was now just reported back at the end of March was the results of their phase 3 trials. That means a lot of patients participated in them. And actually there were 2 trials together. It was now a combination medication. It's tezacaftor and the old ivacaftor that we've been using here for a while. And this was the press release that the company Vertex that put out announcing the results of this study. And it was really 2 different studies. One of them tested in people whose both mutations were delta F508, but they also had another group of patients who had just 1 copy of the delta F508, and their other mutation that was causing their cystic fibrosis was in a subgroup. It was a group that's called mutations that have residual function. It meant that although that mutation was causing the protein to not work well, it still had a little bit of function in it. Not enough to keep people healthy. They still had cystic fibrosis. But that was the second trial group that they looked at. And what they found was that there was benefits in both of these groups, equal to or better than what we had seen with Orkambi. But the other key is that it was really generally well tolerated. The rates of people stopping the drug because of problems was really quite low. In fact, there was no difference whether you were taking a placebo, a sugar pill, or the actual drug. And this is another giant step forward that we found with this new combination here. Just a general statement of drug development, and Dr. Bell is going to spend, I think, a lot more time on this. But in general, we know that drugs that look good in the laboratory, when you can test how they're working in the laboratory, they may or may not work well in patients. There's many, many circumstances where something really looked good in the laboratory, looked good in animals, but when we tried it in patients with any number of diseases, that they failed. But we're beginning to learn that in the case of cystic fibrosis, that some of the laboratory tests that we can do on these medicines that are trying to correct the abnormal protein, that these have been relatively predictive, that if it's looked good in the laboratory and if it's safe, it has a reasonably good chance it's going to work in patients. And why do I tell you this? Because although we had the tezacaftor-ivacaftor results that look really exciting, and if all goes well, probably within 6 months, I would hope maybe even a little less, we may have it available if it gets FDA approved. But we're not going to stop there. Many companies, including the company that developed the tezacaftor-ivacaftor, already has the next generation of medications that they are studying now. In fact, there are 4 new drugs. 2 of them are already in clinical trials. 2 more are poised to be there right away. And these are 4 drugs that are important. And the reason I want to tell you about them well before we have the answer whether they will work in humans, because it looks really promising to me. Because these drugs are really showing impressive results when you test them in the laboratory. And the best results have been when you add these new drugs to the already existing ones, whether it be the Orkambi or this new tezacaftor-ivacaftor. I'm just going to show you 2 data slides because this is really what causes me to have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of optimism here. The bar on the far left here, this is showing what happens to people, the effectiveness of the drug ivacaftor if they have one of these gating mutations. So what this graph is showing you, we know when there's mutations in the CF gene that the protein doesn't work well. In fact, often it works hardly at all. And that what we want to do is have these modulator drugs that you could take and it would interact with a protein that's not working and make it work better. And so the blue box there is the amount of activity that a typical patient who has cystic fibrosis, how much activity their mutant protein would, their abnormal protein. As you can see, it's very little. 100% would be someone without any CF mutations in their genes. And we already know from 5 years ago or so that when we gave ivacaftor to people with these gating mutations, G551D in this case, it actually improved the laboratory function up to 50%. And we know that it helped patients a substantial amount there. What's exciting, though, is these next generation medications are coming close to doing this as well. So this is information with cells that were taken from someone who had 2 mutations, both of them delta F508. We already know that the lumacaftor-ivacaftor, that's Orkambi, that had some improvement, but it was only about 25% of what the normal would be. But now when you add these new compounds to it in these boxes, whether it's one they call VX152 or VX440, that you add that to it, look to see the amount of increase. In fact, it's better than what we saw with the ivacaftor for G551D. Those patients benefited a lot. If this can go on to clinical trials and show improvement, then we would hopefully have something that will be better than ivacaftor for G551D alone. Now, these are patients who have 2 copies of delta F508. Every time we have tried the study with things like ivacaftor or Orkambi, and we've tried them in patients who just have 1 copy, it hasn't worked well. But we now know that if you add these next generation drugs to it, and those are the 2 bars on the far right-hand side, this brings it up almost to the same level that we saw with ivacaftor. So the bottom line to this is that in the laboratory, we've got some very promising results that if it is translated into humans, and we certainly hope it will, and if it proves to be safe, within probably the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to have even better treatments than the ones that are coming out now, and those have been significantly beneficial. So I think Dr. Bell, I heard he's going to show this slide, so I don't want to spend time. Good. Yeah, so I apologize. I thought you were doing a little different. But anyway, we've got a lot of people working on it here. And the acknowledgments here for it is obviously the scientists who have developed it, the research staff, the clinicians, and obviously the patients and the families, and the donors who made this possible. But I know we're going to introduce Dr. Bell in just a minute. Dr. Nasser is going to be doing it there. But actually, probably one of the biggest drivers to all of this has been the contributions that Dr. Bell was able to do by setting up the process and the foundation to really generate all this. And he's going to tell us all about that as well. But thank you. Yeah.